Hey, so tonight we're going to talk about something a little less romanticized, a bit grittier, than the braided beards and shining axes you often see in the movies. We're going to plunge into the true sensory reality of Viking Age Scandinavia, a reality that often smelled, well, quite a lot worse than you might imagine. Forget the myth of the perfectly groomed, impeccably clean Norseman. That's largely Hollywood nonsense. We're diving into the real stink. Before we embark on this fragrant journey into the past, do me a favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below with your current location and what time it is for you right now. Alright, find that cozy spot, pull your blanket up high, and let's start peeling back the layers of history, one pungent detail at a time. You settle deeper into your comfortable chair. Perhaps you've just stepped out of a hot shower, smelling of soap and shampoo, your clothes freshly laundered and soft against your skin. This modern sanctuary, this cocoon of cleanliness, is a stark contrast to the world we are about to enter. For centuries, the image of the Viking has been one of fierce warriors, yes, but also of surprisingly fastidious individuals. We see them depicted with beautifully braided hair, their beards immaculately kept, often accompanied by archaeological finds of combs, tweezers, and ear spoons. These artifacts, lovingly preserved in museums, whisper tales of a people who cared for their appearance, who perhaps even prided themselves on their personal hygiene. Standing apart from their supposedly less scrupulous European contemporaries, you've probably seen the illustrations. A burly Norseman carefully grooming his beard, a woman meticulously braiding her hair, both looking remarkably fresh and clean for people living 1,000 years ago. But I'm here to tell you, my friend, that this image, while containing a kernel of truth, is a profoundly incomplete, even misleading picture. It's a myth, carefully constructed over time, that ignores the overwhelming sensory reality of daily life in the Viking Age. While it's true that combs and other grooming tools existed, their purpose and efficacy were far removed from what we understand today. Think about it. A comb can tame unruly hair, yes, but it doesn't remove the pervasive odor of stale sweat, the sticky residue of animal fat, or the microscopic particles of smoke and soot that clung to every fiber of their existence. An ear spoon might remove wax, but it does little for the deep-seated grime embedded in skin that rarely experienced a truly thorough wash. These tools were cosmetic, practical for appearance, and perhaps basic comfort. But they were not instruments of true sanitation. Imagine, if you will, the sheer volume of organic matter that permeated every aspect of their lives. You live in a world where waste disposal is meticulously managed, where water flows freely and cleanly from your taps, where every surface can be sterilized with chemicals. The Vikings had none of this. Their world was one of constant interaction with the raw, untamed elements of nature and the unavoidable byproducts of human and animal existence. Their environment was not sanitized. It was alive, teeming with microorganisms, many of which produced the very odors we find so offensive today. When you picture a Viking longship, do you see a sleek, clean vessel, its timbers scrubbed, its crew smelling of fresh sea air? Or do you see the reality? A wooden craft soaked with brine, fish guts, human sweat, stale rations, and the ever-present stench of bilge water. The romantic ideal often skips over these visceral details, painting a picture that is more akin to a modern historical reenactment, where participants often have the luxury of returning to a hot shower and clean clothes at the end of the day. For the Vikings, there was no end of the day from the sensory assault. It was their constant, unrelenting reality. So why this persistent myth? Perhaps it's a desire to elevate them, to find common ground with our modern sensibilities. Or perhaps it's a misunderstanding of what cleanliness truly meant in a pre-industrial, pre-scientific era. For them, practical grooming, keeping lice at bay with a comb, or rinsing off visible dirt, might have been the pinnacle of what was achievable or even desirable. It was a functional cleanliness, not an aesthetic or hygienic one in the modern sense. They did not understand germ theory. they did not equate lingering odors with disease in the way we do. Their perception of smell was profoundly different, desensitized by constant exposure. What would be an unbearable stench to your modern nose was simply the backdrop of their everyday life, the ambient perfume of their world. You might be thinking, but didn't they bathe? Yes, they did, in various forms. But again, their bathing practices, which we will delve into in greater detail soon, were far from the luxuriant cleansing experiences we cherish. Think of it more as a pragmatic effort to scrape off the top layer of grime, to refresh the skin temporarily, rather than a deep, purifying cleanse. The water was often cold, shared, and rarely infused with the kind of powerful cleaning agents we rely on. And what happened immediately after a bath? You would return to the same smoky longhouse, put on the same unwashed clothes, and resume the same daily activities that quickly re-impregnated you with the smells of your environment. The truth, you see, is far more compelling and frankly far more smelly. It challenges your preconceived notions and invites you to truly step into their world, not just visually but viscerally. To understand the Viking, you must not just see him, but you must, in your mind's eye, smell him. And when you do, you will find a complex symphony of odors that tells a story far richer and more authentic than any clean-shaven, fresh-smelling Hollywood portrayal ever could. So, as we continue this journey, I urge you to let go of the pristine image and instead embrace the full, unfiltered, and deeply aromatic reality of the Viking Age. This is where the real history truly begins to breathe, or perhaps to reek. This foundational segment is crucial for disarming your modern expectations and preparing your senses for the deeper dives we are about to take into the various layers of Viking stench. Every detail, every observation must contribute to the dismantling of that comforting myth and the establishment of a grittier, more realistic sensory landscape. You are not just learning facts. You are learning to perceive the past through a different olfactory lens, a lens unclouded by romanticism and modern sanitization. Now let's step inside, shall we? You've seen the romanticized images of Viking longhouses, cozy, communal, fire crackling merrily in the center. But let me paint a different picture for your mind's nose, a picture far closer to the visceral reality of Viking domestic life. Imagine walking through the low doorway, stooping to avoid the lintel, and being immediately assaulted by a wall of competing, intertwining odors. This wasn't just a home. It was a complex ecosystem of smells, an olfactory bomb detonating in your modern sensibilities. First, the building materials themselves. You're accustomed to drywall, insulation, sealed windows, and fresh paint. Their longhouses were often constructed of turf, stacked high and thick, or unseasoned timber, chinked with clay and moss, roofed with thatch or more turf. These organic materials were not inert. The turf, especially, was a living, breathing entity, constantly moist, fostering the growth of molds, mildews, and a myriad of bacteria. Picture the damp earth, perpetually releasing its earthy, microbial scent, amplified by the enclosed space. The wood, unsealed and untreated, absorbed every spill, every cooking fume, every exhalation, creating a porous surface that held on to odors with an iron grip. Over years, decades even, these materials became saturated, a sponge for the collective effluvia of its inhabitants. Then consider the ventilation. Your home has windows that open, HVAC systems, fans, filters. The longhouse had, at best, a few small, unglazed window openings, often covered with hide or cloth, and the smoke hole in the roof, which was more for letting out smoke than for inviting in fresh air. Even with the smoke hole, much of the smoke from the central hearth lingered, clinging to everything. This smoke, from burning wood and peat, wasn't just a fleeting scent. It was a permanent, acrid overlay to all other smells. It would sting your eyes, scratch your throat, and impregnate your clothes, hair, and skin with a deep, smoky aroma that would follow you wherever you went. It was a smell that never truly left you. But the real complexity of the longhouse's aroma came from its multifaceted function. This wasn't just a sleeping area. It was a kitchen, a workshop, a stable, a social hub, and often a nursery, all under one roof. Think about the animals. In many longhouses, especially in colder climes, livestock, sheep, goats, even small cows, shared the space with humans, often separated by a simple partition or even just occupying the colder end of the building. Imagine the rich, earthy smell of animal dung, the ammonia tang of urine, the lanolin scent of sheep's wool, the musky odor of their bodies, all warmed and concentrated by the heat of the hearth. Animals, unlike humans, aren't concerned with discrete urination or defecation. Their waste would be omnipresent, trodden into the earth floor, absorbed by the straw bedding, contributing a deep, pungent foundation to the longhouse's scent profile. You might be accustomed to a separate barn or a fenced-off pasture, but here the animals were your co-tenants, their bodily functions an unavoidable part of your daily sensory experience. Now let's turn to the human element. You have a dedicated bathroom with plumbing, sanitation, and powerful deodorizers. The Vikings did not. Human waste was often disposed of summarily. In some cases, it might be collected in a pit or bucket, emptied periodically. In others, particularly during the night or in inclement weather, it might be an unceremonious quick trip just outside the door, or even more informally, in a corner of the longhouse itself, especially for children or the infirm. The earth floor, while absorbent, would quickly become saturated, creating persistent patches of ammoniacal stench, particularly in damp conditions. There was no bleach, no disinfectant, no concept of sanitizing. The very ground you walked on, ate from, and slept near was a repository of human and animal effluvia. Cooking, too, added its own potent layer. Imagine rendering animal fats, boiling fish, smoking meats, baking bread, all over an open fire in a relatively unventilated space. The smells of charred food, simmering stews, roasting meat, and the constant drip of rendered fat onto hot coals would create a greasy, heavy atmosphere. These cooking odors, delicious in the moment, quickly turned stale, clinging to the walls, the furniture, the bedding, and especially to the clothes and hair of the inhabitants. You know how the smell of last night's fried fish can linger in your modern kitchen even with excellent ventilation. Now multiply that by 100 in a space that is both kitchen and bedroom, day in and day out for years. The air itself would be thick with these cumulative culinary aromas, a rich tapestry of fats, smoke, and protein decomposition. Consider the accumulation of general refuse. Your household trash is neatly bagged and taken out weekly. In the longhouse, food scraps, bone shards, wood shavings, dropped fibers, and general detritus would accumulate. While some organic waste might be fed to animals or composted, much of it would simply fall to the floor, becoming part of the longhouse's substrate. These organic materials, decomposing slowly in the warm, humid environment of the house, would release gases, methane, sulfur compounds, fatty acids, contributing to a pervasive, sweet-sour, decaying scent. Rodents and insects drawn by the food and warmth would also contribute their own specific odors, their droppings and nests adding to the overall bouquet, and finally, the people themselves. We'll delve deeper into personal hygiene, but suffice it to say, many individuals would spend weeks, if not months, in the same clothing, working, sweating, eating, sleeping. Their bodies, not washed with modern soaps, would accumulate layers of dead skin, sweat, oils, and environmental grime. When you put a dozen or more such individuals, along with their animals, their cooking, and their waste, into a confined, poorly ventilated space, you create a sensory experience that would utterly overwhelm your modern nose. The air itself would be thick, heavy, a palpable presence, not just visually, but olfactorily. It would be a constant, inescapable symphony of the animal, the human, the organic, and the technological. The smell of iron working, perhaps. You might try to imagine it, holding your breath, picturing a fleeting moment of discomfort. But for them, this was simply home. Their olfactory senses, constantly bombarded, would have adapted, filtering out what you would find unbearable, but even then there would be distinctions. A new, unfamiliar smell, a change in the usual domestic bouquet might signal danger or an important event. For you, entering that long house would be a journey into a time machine of putrefaction, a visceral lesson in just how far we've come in our quest for cleanliness. This domestic olfactory bomb, this intricate web of interdependent odors, was the very air they breathed, a constant reminder of their intimate connection to the earth, their animals, and the raw, unfiltered realities of pre-modern life. You'd leave feeling not just enlightened, but perhaps a little queasy, and certainly with a profound appreciation for your own odorless, sterile existence. You step out of the longhouse, gasping for a breath of what you hope is fresher air. But even outside, the scent of the nearby animal pens, the middens and the smoke from other dwellings still permeates the landscape. Now let's turn our attention to the source of many of those indoor aromas: the bodies of the Vikings themselves. You've just experienced a modern shower, perhaps even a luxurious bath, complete with scented soaps, warm water, and fluffy towels. You emerge feeling truly clean, your skin fresh, your hair squeaky clean. Now try to shed that sensation, that expectation, because Viking bathing was a profoundly different experience, one that, by modern standards, barely scratched the surface of cleanliness. The myth, as we discussed, suggests a people who bathed frequently, perhaps even weekly, and indeed archaeological evidence and sagas speak of bathing. But the nature of that bathing is where the critical distinction lies. Forget your porcelain tub and endless hot water. Imagine instead a wooden tub, often shared, or a trip to a natural hot spring, or perhaps most commonly, a simple bucket of water and a rough cloth. The water itself was precious. Heating it was a laborious, fuel-intensive process. So, hot water was a luxury, often reserved for specific occasions or for those with status. For most, the bath was likely a cool, perhaps even cold, affair. Think about the water itself. It wasn't chlorinated, filtered, or treated. It came from rivers, lakes, or wells, often shared by animals and humans, and susceptible to whatever runoff or waste might enter it upstream. While clear to the eye, it carried its own microbial load, its own earthy or brackish scent. To wash with this water was simply to rinse, to remove the most superficial layer of visible dirt, not to sterilize or truly cleanse. There was no soap in the modern sense. They might have used lye made from wood ash and animal fat, which could be harsh and irritating, or simple herbal infusions for a pleasant scent, but nothing like the detergent-based antibacterial soaps you use. Lye soap certainly removed grease, but it often left skin dry and irritated, and its own strong chemical odor would mix with, rather than eliminate, bodily smells. A bath might consist of a quick scrub with a rough wool cloth, perhaps a handful of sand or ash as an abrasive. You would rinse off the visible grime, yes, but the deep-seated oils, the dead skin cells that constantly slough off your body, the accumulated residues of sweat and environmental pollutants, these would largely remain. Think of it as rinsing a muddy boot under a cold tap. It looks cleaner, but the mud is still deeply embedded in the fibers. Now imagine your entire body is that boot. Consider the sheer amount of skin, the folds, the crevices, the areas that are difficult to reach or clean effectively without modern tools and endless hot water. Your scalp, constantly producing oils, would be a magnet for dirt, smoke, and sweat. While they used combs, these were primarily for detangling and removing lice, not for deep cleansing. Hair, especially long hair, would quickly become greasy, matted and saturated with the smells of the longhouse, the smoke, and the body. The idea of a shampoo that effectively stripped oils and left hair fresh was entirely alien. Their hair, even when combed, would carry a pervasive, heavy odor, a blend of sebum, smoke, and perhaps the faint, sour note of fermentation from lingering moisture. And what about the unseen? Your skin is home to trillions of bacteria, many of which are responsible for breaking down sweat and producing body odor. Modern soaps and deodorants are designed to inhibit these bacteria or mask their output. The Vikings had no such arsenal. Their natural skin flora, uninhibited, would thrive, especially in areas prone to sweating, armpits, groin, feet. Imagine the humid, enclosed spaces of their clothing creating a perfect incubator for these odor-producing microbes. The sweet, sour, musky scent of unadulterated human body odor would be a constant companion, not just to them, but to anyone in their proximity. Then there's the issue of footwear and feet. Your shoes are designed to breathe, to be washed, to be changed daily. You have socks that wick away moisture and are laundered after every use. Viking footwear was primarily leather, often unlined, worn for long periods, sometimes without any separate foot wrapping, or with rough wool bindings that would absorb sweat but rarely be washed. Imagine the sheer build-up of moisture, dead skin, and bacteria in those enclosed leather boots. The pungent, cheesy, almost ammoniacal stench of unwashed, perpetually damp feet would be incredibly potent. It would permeate the footwear itself, becoming a permanent fixture, a personal aroma cloud that followed them everywhere. When they finally removed those boots, the concentrated odor released into the air would be staggering to your modern nose. And what happens after a bath? You towel off with a clean, dry, fluffy towel. The Viking might use a rough cloth or simply air dry before donning the very same clothes they had worn before, clothes that we will discuss in the next segment, but which you can safely assume were far from fresh. So the cleanliness achieved was fleeting, a temporary respite quickly undermined by their environment and their attire. The bath was a moment of refreshment, perhaps, a brief relief from the stickiness of the day, but it was not a reset button for their overall scent profile. Think about dental hygiene. You brush twice a day, floss, use mouthwash, and visit a dentist regularly. The Vikings, at best, might chew on twigs or rough cloths to clean their teeth. Food particles, sugars, and acids would accumulate, leading to widespread dental decay, gum disease, and chronic bad breath. The constant presence of fermented and smoked foods in their diet would only exacerbate this. The foul odor of decaying teeth and infected gums, combined with digestive gases, would create a powerful, unpleasant halitosis that would be unavoidable in close conversation. So, when you picture that Viking freshly bathed, remember that his cleanliness was purely relative. He might have removed the top layer of dirt, his hair might have been combed, but beneath that superficial sheen lay a body saturated with the odors of his diet, his environment, his unwashed clothing, and the natural, uninhibited processes of human biology. His skin would still carry the faint, lingering scent of smoke, animal fat, and unwashed pores. His hair would be heavy with oils and the pervasive aroma of the longhouse. His feet would be a pungent, enclosed ecosystem. His breath, a testament to his diet and lack of dental care. He was, to your modern nose, a walking, talking, deeply aromatic testament to a world utterly devoid of modern sanitation and hygiene. And that, my friend, is a truth far more resonant and authentic than any romanticized myth. You're in your soft, clean pajamas now, perhaps freshly laundered and smelling of spring rain or mountain air. You change your clothes daily, sometimes more often, and toss them into a laundry basket, confident that they'll emerge pristine from the washing machine. This routine is so ingrained, so utterly normal that you probably don't even think about it. But in the Viking Age, the concept of laundry day, as you know it, simply didn't exist. Their clothing was not merely an outer layer. It was, for all intents and purposes, a second skin, one that accumulated layers of grime, sweat, and odor over weeks, months, or even years, becoming an integral part of their personal scent signature. Let's delve into the materials themselves. Wool was king. It was warm, durable, and shed water reasonably well, making it ideal for the harsh Scandinavian climate. Linen was also used, particularly for undergarments, as it was lighter and more breathable. But neither of these fabrics was easy to clean. Wool, especially with its complex fibers, is notoriously difficult to truly deep clean without modern detergents and hot water. It absorbs odors like a sponge and holds on to them with tenacity. Imagine your favorite wool sweater, worn for days on end without washing, exposed to smoke, cooking fumes, animal dander, and your own body's exhalations. Now imagine that sweater is your tunic, your trousers, your cloak, worn continuously. Washing clothing was a monumental task. There was no running water, no washing machines. It involved hauling water, heating it over a fire, again, a huge expenditure of fuel and labor, and then laboriously scrubbing garments by hand, often with lye, strong alkaline ash water, or urine, which contains ammonia, a natural cleaner, but which also imparts its own distinct, pungent aroma. These methods were harsh on the fabric and not particularly effective at removing deep-seated dirt and odor. Furthermore, drying clothes was also a challenge, especially in cold or damp weather. Clothes might be hung by the fire, absorbing more smoke, or simply worn damp, leading to mildew and an even more pervasive musty odor. Because of the immense effort involved, clothing was simply not washed frequently. A tunic might go for weeks or even months between washes. Outer garments like cloaks might never be truly washed, but perhaps simply aired out or beaten to remove loose dirt. You wore the same layers day in and day out, through work, through travel, through sleep, through battle. Each activity added its own unique contribution to the garment's evolving scent profile. Think about the sheer accumulation. Your clothes absorb your sweat, your dead skin cells, your body oils. They become impregnated with the smoke from the longhouse fire, the grease from cooking, the dust and dirt from the ground, the blood and guts from butchering animals or from the battlefield. If you're a farmer, your clothes are coated in the smells of dung, hay, and damp earth. If you're a smith, they reek of soot, charcoal, and the metallic tang of heated iron. If you're a fisherman, they are perpetually saturated with the briny, decaying smell of fish, scales, and seawater. These layers weren't simply on the surface. They became deeply embedded in the fibers of the cloth, a permanent part of the garment's molecular structure. Imagine wearing the same wool tunic day after day. It would become stiff with dried sweat and grime. The armpits would be particularly pungent, a concentrated repository of body odor, fermentation, and bacteria. The neck and cuffs, where skin met fabric, would be dark with accumulated dirt and oils. When you moved, the fabric would release whaley of these accumulated odors, creating a localized cloud around you. Consider the practicalities. Many Viking garments were dyed. Natural dyes, while beautiful, were not always color-fast, meaning frequent washing could cause them to fade. This was another disincentive to wash clothing often. Furthermore, mending and repair were constant. A garment was a valuable possession, painstakingly crafted, and it was worn until it literally fell apart. The idea of discarding an item because it smelled bad was unthinkable. Its utility far outweighed its aesthetic or olfactory drawbacks. Undergarments, like linen shifts, might be washed slightly more often, as they were closer to the skin and could absorb more sweat. But even then, they would still carry the pervasive scent of the body and the longhouse smoke. And what about your outer layers? Your fur-lined cloaks, your leather jerkins, your thick wool trousers. These were even less likely to see a thorough washing. Animal furs and leather, when damp and uncleaned, develop their own powerful, musky, sometimes acrid odors. These natural materials, combined with the human body odor and environmental grime, created a truly complex and overwhelming bouquet. You know that faint, almost imperceptible old clothes smell that clings to forgotten garments in an attic? Now amplify that by 1,000 and add layers of smoke, animal, human, and environmental filth. Their clothes didn't just smell of things. They were saturated with things. They were a living archive of their daily existence, a testament to every meal, every journey, every moment of work or rest. When a Viking moved, when they walked past you, when they sat near you, their clothing would emit a cloud of these combined odors, a personal atmospheric pressure system of accumulated scent. This isn't just about being a bit smelly. This is about clothes that are fundamentally permeated by their environment, by their labor and by their bodies, to a degree that is utterly unimaginable to your laundered, sanitized modern self. They were wearing a textile representation of their entire world, a world that was earthy, greasy, smoky, sweaty, and profoundly, unapologetically aromatic. Their clothing truly was a second skin, one woven not just from wool and linen, but from the very essence of the Viking age itself, an essence that, by your standards, would be incredibly unrelentingly pungent. You would not just detect their presence, you would smell their history, their daily struggles, and their entire way of life clinging to every thread. And that, my friend, is a profound sensory lesson in the stark difference between then and now. You just finished a meal, perhaps something light and fresh.
And afterwards, you probably brushed your teeth.
Maybe even used mouthwash, ensuring your breath is clean and pleasant. This daily ritual taken for granted plays a crucial role in managing the internal sources of our bodily odors. But for the Vikings, their diet, their digestion, and their near-total lack of dental hygiene created an internal odor factory that significantly contributed to their overall aromatic presence, adding layers of halitosis and flatulence to their already potent external scent. Let's start with their diet. You eat a varied diet of fresh fruits, vegetables, lean meats, and refined grains. The Viking diet, while robust, was often heavy in smoked, salted, and fermented foods, essential preservation techniques in a pre-refrigeration era. Imagine large quantities of dried fish, smoked meats, pork, beef, game, fermented dairy products like skyer, and root vegetables. While nutritious, these foods carry powerful odors that don't simply vanish after consumption. They become integral to your internal chemistry. Consider fermented foods. While beneficial for gut health, fermentation produces strong, distinct smells. The consumption of large amounts of fermented dairy, for example, would contribute a sour, lactic acid note to their breath and digestive gases. Smoked meats, while delicious, imbue not just the food itself, but also your breath and eventually your body's excretions with a deep, smoky, often tar-like aroma. These are not subtle background notes. These are front and center flavors and consequently front and center smells. The lack of refrigeration also meant that food was often on the verge of spoiling or even slightly spoiled. While they had different tolerances, the consumption of foods that were slightly rancid or past their prime would introduce a host of new microbial activity within the gut, leading to increased gas production and more pungent digestive byproducts. You were accustomed to the very freshest ingredients. They lived with a constant dance on the edge of decomposition. Now let's talk about digestion. Your gut microbiome is a complex ecosystem. The Viking diet, with its high fiber content from grains and root vegetables, its reliance on preserved foods, and its general lack of delicate, easily digestible ingredients, would have led to robust and often quite gaseous digestion. Flatulence, in a world without shame or polite concealment, would have been a regular, openly expressed bodily function. Imagine a longhouse full of people having eaten a hearty meal of smoked fish, fermented milk and root vegetables, all within a confined, poorly ventilated space. The cumulative effect of their digestive gases released freely and frequently would add a powerful sulfuric and distinctly earthy note to the ambient air. You are accustomed to suppressing such emissions. They were simply a part of the everyday sound and smellscape. But perhaps the most significant internal contributor to their overall stench was their oral hygiene, or rather, the stark absence of it. You brush your teeth multiple times a day, use floss, mouthwash, and visit the dentist regularly. You are actively fighting against plaque, tartar, and bacteria that cause bad breath. The Vikings had no such modern tools or understanding. At best, they might chew on twigs or rough cloths to physically remove some food particles. For many, though, there would be no regular oral care whatsoever. Imagine the consequences: a lifetime of accumulated food particles, sugars, and acids clinging to teeth and gums. This environment is a paradise for oral bacteria, leading to widespread dental decay, cavities, gum disease, periodontitis, and frequent oral infections, including abscesses. The smell of decaying teeth, of pus from an infected gum, of rotting food trapped between molars is not just unpleasant, it is profoundly putrid. This isn't a fleeting bad breath from a garlicky meal. This is chronic pathological halitosis, a constant, sickeningly sweet-sour, purulent aroma emanating from the mouth. When a Viking spoke, when they laughed, when they simply exhaled, this potent blend of dental decay, gum infection, and lingering food odors would be released into the air. It would mix with the smell of their smoke-infused breath, their unwashed skin, and their grimy clothes, creating an assault on your senses. Conversations in close quarters would be a truly challenging olfactory experience for your modern nose. You would instinctively recoil, not just from their physical proximity, but from the invisible cloud of putrefaction that emanated from their mouths. Furthermore, any infections in the mouth could easily spread, impacting general health and contributing to a systemic, low-grade inflammation that might also influence overall body odor. The constant presence of infection, both oral and sometimes skin-related, would add to a general scent of ill health and decay that was likely common in a world without antibiotics and modern medicine. So, when you consider the Viking, don't just think of the external factors. Think of the internal reality, a digestive system processing a diet of potent, often fermented and smoked, foods leading to frequent and unfiltered gaseous emissions. And critically, think of a mouth, a gateway to the body, often riddled with decay, infection, and the putrid scent of unchecked bacterial growth. This internal odor factory worked tirelessly 24/7 to produce a complex and powerful aroma that intertwined with their external smells, creating a truly holistic and overwhelmingly pungent personal scent. Their breath, their digestion, their very internal processes were all conspiring to ensure that their overall aromatic footprint was far more robust than anything you could ever experience or tolerate in your modern, internally sanitized world. This deep dive into their diet and digestion allows you to understand that the stench wasn't just external. It originated from within, a biological byproduct of their very existence. You've imagined them in their longhouses, smelled them in their clothes, and even contemplated their internal aromas. Now let's cast our minds out to sea to the iconic long ship, the very symbol of Viking expansion and power. You might picture the fresh sea breeze, the clean spray of the waves, and the crisp smell of salt. Forget that idyllic image. The longship, for all its majesty and engineering brilliance, was a concentrated crucible of human exertion, fear, and sustained filth, creating a unique and utterly overwhelming stench that defined the Viking journey. Imagine yourself on board. You're not sailing on a modern cruise liner with private cabins, fresh water, and sanitation facilities. You're one of perhaps 30 to 60 men packed tightly into an open wooden vessel, exposed to the elements for weeks, even months at a time. The first smell to greet you, even before you board, is likely the ship itself. The heavy, pungent odor of wet wood permeated by years of previous voyages. This wood has absorbed sea salt, stale seawater, the residue of countless meals, and the inevitable bodily fluids of its crew. It's a foundational smell, a permanent fixture. Then the human element, intensified by confinement. You are rowing for hours, day after day, your muscles burning, your body sweating profusely. This isn't the light perspiration you experience during a workout. This is the deep, profuse sweat of sustained, strenuous labor mingled with adrenaline and the primal fear of the open sea. Your clothes, already saturated with the longhouse smoke and past grime, quickly become soaked, not just with sweat, but with sea spray, which then dries, leaving a crust of salt and minerals. This cycle of wetting and drying without washing further concentrates the odors within the fabric, creating a potent, musky, salty and sour aroma. Think about the sheer number of bodies, dozens of men, all producing sweat, all sharing the same confined space with no possibility of privacy or individual hygiene. The air itself would be heavy, humid, and thick with the collective effluvium of so many unwashed, exerting bodies. You would literally be breathing in the aerosolized particles of your shipmates' bodily odors. Now add to that the ever-present problem of human waste. There were no latrines on a longship. When nature called, it was often a matter of leaning over the side, a precarious and often chilling endeavor, especially in rough seas. But what about when it was too rough, or when sickness struck? Seasickness was undoubtedly common, and the confines of the ship would quickly become coated in vomit, which would then mix with seawater, stale food, and the general grime. And if dysentery or other intestinal illnesses broke out, a not uncommon occurrence on long voyages with questionable food and water, the situation would quickly devolve into an unspeakable, pervasive putrid mess with human excrement adding its overpowering stench to every surface and every breath of air. Imagine the chilling wind carrying the faint smell of vomit and feces back onto the deck, becoming one with the salty air. Food and drink on board also contributed to the olfactory assault. Rations typically consisted of dried meat, dried fish, hardtack, a type of hard, dry biscuit, and perhaps fermented beverages like ale or mead. These foods, while sustaining, were often dry, difficult to digest, and prone to spoilage. Bits of dried fish and meat would fall into the bilge, slowly putrefying in the damp, dark depths of the ship. Stale ale, spilled and uncleaned, would ferment further, adding a sour, yeasty tang. You're accustomed to fresh water and clean containers. Their water would often be stored in wooden barrels, which could become stagnant or contaminated over a long journey, contributing a musty, even foul, taste and smell to their vital hydration. The bilge itself was a powerful odor generator. This is the lowest part of the ship's hull, where all water that leaks in, spills or condenses collects. It's a dark, damp, often oxygen-deprived environment, perfect for anaerobic bacteria to thrive. Here, the accumulated seawater, rainwater, food scraps, human vomit, animal waste, if any livestock were on board, and general detritus would slowly decompose, creating a distinct, sulfuric, hydrogen sulfide smell. The unmistakable stench of rotting organic matter akin to rotten eggs or sewer gas. This bilge smell would permeate the entire ship, rising through the deck planks, becoming a constant companion. Then consider the aftermath of a raid. The longship would return not just with loot, but often with the pervasive, metallic, sickly, sweet smell of blood. Fresh blood, dried blood, old blood, mingling with the sweat of battle, the smoke of burning settlements, and the fear of both the raiders and the raided. This smell of violence, of life extinguished and bodies broken would cling to the timbers, to the weapons, and to the very clothing of the warriors, a grim testament to their bloody work. For you, the smell of blood is startling, immediate. For them, it was likely commonplace, another layer in their complex aromatic world, but still distinct and powerful. And what about sleep? You sleep in a clean bed on fresh sheets. They slept wherever they could find space on deck, often huddled together for warmth, using their cloaks as blankets. These cloaks, as we've established, were deeply impregnated with every conceivable odor. So even in sleep, there was no escape from the sensory assault. The collective snores, the rustling of unwashed wool, the pervasive smells of the ship and its inhabitants all contributed to a restless, odorous sleep experience. The long ship journey was a total sensory immersion into the harsh realities of Viking life. It was a journey defined not just by its destination, but by its distinct, potent, and inescapable smell. You would step off that ship, not invigorated by the sea air, but utterly exhausted, your body coated in salt, grime, and the concentrated odors of weeks at sea. And your clothes, your hair, your very skin would reek of this experience, carrying the undeniable aromatic signature of the longship, a smell that would precede you, announce your arrival, and linger long after you had departed. This segment emphasizes that the Vikings' odor was not just a static state, but a dynamic, accumulating force, constantly evolving with their experiences and particularly amplified by the intense, confined conditions of their seafaring life. You work in an office, perhaps a clean factory or a quiet home. Your clothes might pick up a faint smell of coffee or your lunch, but nothing truly pervasive. For the Viking, however, their daily labor, their chosen occupation, often dictated a powerful and distinct set of odors that became an inseparable part of their personal aromatic signature. Their hands, their tools, their clothing, and their very skin would be impregnated with the smells of their craft, creating a complex tapestry of occupational aromas that would cling to them like a second skin. Let's first consider the farmer, the backbone of Viking society. You're accustomed to neatly packaged meat from the supermarket and vegetables grown in sterile conditions. For the Viking farmer, life was intimately entwined with animals and the earth. Imagine the pervasive smell of animal dung, cattle, sheep, goats, pigs. It would be on their boots, their clothes, their hands. This isn't just a fleeting whiff. It's a deep, earthy, ammoniacal smell that penetrates everything. The straw and hay in animal pens, often damp and mingled with urine and feces, would contribute a musty, fermenting aroma. When animals were slaughtered, the metallic, coppery smell of blood would be present, along with the rich, greasy smell of rendered fat and the distinct odor of intestines and offal. These smells would cling to their garments, their hair, and their skin, becoming a permanent part of their being.
A farmer would carry the scent of the barnyard with them, a rich, organic blend of animal and earth. Next, consider the fisherman.
Your fish is on ice, cleaned and filleted. For the Viking fishermen, the sea was their workplace. Their boats, their nets, their hands, their clothing would be perpetually saturated with the briny, decaying smell of fish, scales, guts, the slick residue of fish slime, and the raw, pungent aroma of fresh catch would be a constant presence. When the fish was dried or smoked, the intense, smoky, and often slightly putrid smell of preserved seafood would cling to everything in the vicinity. Imagine the smell of a fish market, concentrated and magnified, clinging to a person for weeks on end, combined with the general saltiness of the sea, the dampness, and the inevitable traces of their own sweat and grime. A fisherman would carry the unmistakable scent of the ocean's bounty and its inevitable decay. Now let's turn to the crafts. The smith, for example. You might visit a modern blacksmith shop and catch a faint whiff of hot metal and coal. For the Viking smith, the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning charcoal, the sharp, metallic tang of heated iron, the sulphurous scent of slag, and the general dust and grime of the forge. Their clothes would be stained with soot, permeated by smoke, and their skin would carry the faint but pervasive smell of iron and fire. The intense heat would also mean constant sweating, adding a layer of body odor to the metallic and smoky environment. Their hands would be calloused and grimy, often smelling of the materials they worked with. What about those who worked with hides and leather? This was a truly pungent occupation. Tanning animal hides involved soaking them in foul-smelling solutions, often including animal brains, urine, or oak bark, to make them pliable and prevent putrefaction. The stench of decaying animal matter, of strong ammonia, and of the various chemical solutions used in the tanning process would be overwhelming. Those who worked in this trade would be constantly steeped in these powerful, offensive odors. Their hands, their hair, their clothing would absorb these smells so deeply that they would be impossible to remove. A tanner would literally reek of death and chemicals, a scent that would repel your modern nose from a great distance. Even those who worked with wood, crafting homes, ships, or tools, would have their own distinct aroma. The fresh, resinous scent of newly cut timber would quickly give way to the more complex, earthy, and sometimes moldy smell of unseasoned wood, especially when damp. Sawdust, wood chips, and the residue of sap would cling to their clothes, blending with the ever-present smoke of the longhouse. Consider the warrior, the raider. Beyond the longship, their profession involved the visceral realities of battle. The smell of fear, a sharp, metallic, almost electric scent, would be followed by the coppery, cloying smell of blood, fresh, drying, and dried. The stench of human waste, released involuntarily in moments of terror or injury, would mix with the smoke of burning villages, the acrid scent of sweat, and the pungent aroma of leather and metal armor. This was a cocktail of violence and death that would cling to their weapons, their armor, and their bodies, a grim perfume that announced their deadly purpose. Each of these occupations then contributed a specific, powerful, and often unpleasant layer to the overall Viking aroma. A farmer, a fisherman, a smith, a tanner, a warrior. Each would carry their professional signature with them, a badge of their labor, inseparable from their personal identity. These were not smells that could be washed away at the end of the day. They were deeply ingrained, part of the fabric of their lives, and part of the very air they breathed, for you in your sterile modern world. The idea of having your professional life literally seep into your pores and clothing to such an extent is almost unthinkable. You might come home with a faint scent of your office or workshop, but it's easily shed with a shower and a change of clothes. For the Viking, these occupational odors were a constant, pervasive reality, adding yet another rich, complex, and overwhelmingly pungent layer to their already formidable aromatic presence. Their very existence was a symphony of smells, with each profession adding its own distinctive and often brutal note to the grand composition of the Viking age. You are now beginning to understand that there was no neutral smell for a Viking. Their world was a constant, rich, and often challenging olfactory experience. You've journeyed through the longhouse, felt the harshness of their baths, worn their unwashed clothes, tasted their potent diet, and sailed with them on their grimy longships, all the while inhaling the distinct aromas of their varied lives. Now, as our journey through their aromatic world draws to a close, let's bring it all together, reflecting on the cumulative impact of these smells and connecting it back to your modern, sanitized existence. The lingering odor of the Viking, you see, was more than just an unfortunate byproduct of their circumstances. It was an integral part of their identity, a cultural legacy, and a stark reminder of the profound chasm between their reality and your own. Imagine all those individual odors we've explored coalescing into one overwhelming sensory experience. The deep, earthy, smoky, and animalistic tang of the longhouse, perpetually infused with the sweet, sour decay of waste and the acrid sting of wood smoke. Layered upon this, the musky, unwashed body odor of dozens of humans, their skin coated in a mixture of natural oils, sweat, and environmental grime, their hair heavy with sebum and smoke, their clothes a walking archive of weeks or months of unlaundered wear, emitting concentrated bursts of body odor, animal fat, field dirt, fish guts, and charcoal soot with every movement. The pervasive, sulfuric, and often putrid aroma of decaying teeth and infected gums mingling with the digestive gases of a diet rich in smoked and fermented foods. On the longship, this was all intensified by the brine, the bilge, the seasickness, and the ever-present threat of violent exertion and the smell of blood. This wasn't just bad smell as you might conceive it. It was a multi-dimensional, pervasive atmospheric pressure system of scent, a constant assault on your modern olfactory receptors. You would not simply notice a Viking. You would smell their approach long before you saw them. Their presence would be announced by this unique and powerful aromatic signature, a blend of human, animal, environmental, and occupational odors that defined their very being. For them, this complex bouquet was simply normal. Their olfactory senses, constantly bombarded from birth, would have adapted, filtering out much of what you would find unbearable. What was an everyday reality for them would be an immediate, overwhelming shock to you. This difference in perception is crucial. They weren't necessarily dirty by their own standards, which were rooted in practicality and survival. Cleanliness for them was about removing visible dirt, combating lice, and perhaps a superficial rinse for comfort, not about achieving sterility or the absence of odor. Their world had no concept of germ theory, no understanding of how microscopic organisms contribute to both disease and smell. Yet even in their world, distinctions existed. A truly foul smell might indicate illness or decomposition beyond the norm. A new, unfamiliar perfume, perhaps brought back from Byzantium or another trading land, would be a novelty, appreciated for its rarity and exoticism. But their baseline, their default setting, was an aromatic intensity that we can barely fathom. Consider the social implications. In a world without effective deodorants or abundant water for bathing, body odor was an inescapable fact of life. People were simply accustomed to it. It didn't carry the same social stigma it does today. In fact, a man returning from a long ship voyage, smelling of the sea, smoke and battle, might be seen as a sign of strength and accomplishment rather than as someone needing a shower. His scent told a story, a narrative of his exploits and his livelihood. You equate personal cleanliness with social acceptability. They equated physical robustness and competency. Their lingering odor then becomes a powerful lens through which to understand their world. It speaks to their profound connection to the land, to their animals, to their environment. It highlights the ingenuity of their preservation techniques, the harsh realities of their travel, and the relentless demands of their labor. It reminds you that history is not just about names and dates, but about the visceral, sensory experience of being alive in a different time as you now lie in your clean bed. Perhaps with a scented candle flickering nearby, the contrast could not be starker. You live in a world obsessed with eradicating odor, with sanitizing every surface, with creating artificial freshness. You take for granted the miracle of plumbing, the abundance of hot water, the effectiveness of modern detergents and soaps. The Vikings' world was one where every breath, every movement was a reminder of the raw, untamed, and fundamentally aromatic nature of life. So, the next time you see a romanticized image of a Viking or hear tales of their formidable exploits, I want you to remember this journey we've taken. Remember the smell of the longhouse, the unwashed body, the grime of their clothes, the pungency of their diet, and the specific aromas of their toil. Understand that the Viking was, by your standards, profoundly overwhelmingly and unapologetically smelly. And in that powerful, lingering odor, you will find a truth that is far more fascinating, far more human, and far more real than any myth could ever convey. It is a truth that connects you in a strange and visceral way to their lives and makes you profoundly appreciate the silent, odorless comforts of your own. Sleep well, my friend, in your wonderfully clean world.